Hi, I'm Will Smith, Editor-in-Chief of Maximum PC, and I'm here today to show you how to build a computer. It's really easy, takes about 20 minutes. All you need is the parts, a screwdriver, and the components that we have here. So we'll get started. So here we have all the parts that you're going to need to put the computer together. We have a case, motherboard, optical drive, CPU and cooler, RAM, hard drive, power supply, video card, a bowl with some screws, very handy thing to have, and a screwdriver. So the first thing we're going to do is start with the motherboard. This is your motherboard. It's a pretty standard component. If you've built a machine before or added a video card or anything like that, you've definitely seen one. We're going to put the CPU, the memory, and the heatsink on outside of the case because it's actually much easier to work with when you have a lot of space around and you're not jammed up into the corner of a tiny case. So let's get started on that. When you're working with electronics, it's really important that you keep yourself grounded in relation to them. So all you have to do to avoid electrostatic shock is to keep your head in contact with a metal surface and the electronics at the same time. Especially be careful not to touch any of the gold-plated edge connectors on any of your devices, the pins on the bottom of your CPU or anything like that. Or you can risk frying your equipment. I've been doing this for 15 years, haven't actually fried anything yet, but it's better to be safe than sorry. So we're going to put the CPU in first. The first thing you do is lift up this little lever. What it does is locks the CPU into place when you get it placed. I'm going to open it, remove it from its plastic packaging, again being careful not to touch the pins on the bottom. Now if you look at the bottom of the CPU and you look at the socket, you can see that it only goes in one way. You can look at these little guys here. The corner is actually keyed, so there's a triangle on this corner of the thing and there's a triangle on this corner of the CPU. If you line them up, get it exactly above it, and drop it down, it just drops into place. No sweat. Push the lever back down, your CPU is installed. Next, we're going to do the CPU cooler. Now, if you look, this CPU cooler actually has a thermal pad already on the bottom. So what that does is it makes a better seal between the CPU and the heatsink so that it's better heat transfer and there's no kind of overheating issues or something like that with your thing. We're using a stock AMD cooler with this one. If you wanted to use a third-party cooler, then the instructions will be a little different. So please keep that in mind. Now, all you do is these two hooks go over these two plastic knobs on the bracket. So what we're going to do is hook this end. This is the non-latchy end. And then we bring this one around here. And usually a little bit of force required to make this work. So don't be nervous. Usually you don't want to use too much force when you're putting your computer together. But in this case, it's actually okay. Let's see if I've got it hooked here right. There we go. So it's now seated right. I'm latching, see, it snaps into place. Flip the lever over and that'll cinch it down and you're done. Plug in your power too. Power is probably important. So power, there's a little knob of your CPU fan, just drop that right on there and you're good to go. Okay, so the next step is to install the memory. I have here a couple of sticks of DDR3 memory. Now it's really important when you're putting the memory in the motherboard that you pay attention to which slots are the dual channel slots and which aren't. Basically, if you put the memory in the wrong slots, it's going to be operating at half the speed that it could. So I've read the manual here. In this particular board, I'm supposed to put the memory in the two blue slots first. So I put my matched set of memory in here. I'm dropping it in the slot. Actually, I'll do the back one first so you can see them both. Dropping it in the slot and just push down until the little arms click up into place. Do the same thing again. Again, making sure that this notch lines up with the groove in the hole. In the slot. And here we go. Push it down, clicks into place, and we're done.
Action.
Okay, so the first thing we're going to do before we put the motherboard in the case is put this little guy. It's the ATX backplane connector. It has all your keyboard, mouse, USB, network ports, and all that. So what we do is we get it in here. It only fits into the case one way. There's one spot. Watch out. There's sometimes some cables and stuff like that blocking. Sometimes you have to push pretty hard to get it in place, but it'll pop in. There you go. If you have trouble, just take a screwdriver and whack the back of it a little bit. That's fine. So then after that, we're going to take the motherboard. You'll notice, you count the number of standoffs you have. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of these little gold standoffs. 9 holes in the motherboard. We're going to slide it in. It only goes in one way again. Make sure that you get everything lines up with the holes in the backplane connector. Usually not a great idea to hold this by the CPU cooler, but in this case, we're going to live dangerously and see how it goes. Now, when you push this in, you're going to have a little bit of resistance. You want to line up all of the connectors on the backplane. You got to get down behind it and look. There it goes. So see, it pops into place, and then all my holes line up on the motherboard. So the next thing I'm going to do is screw these holes in. There's two types of screws normally used in a computer. There's a wide thread, and then there's this narrow thread. You don't want the narrow thread, you want the wide thread for this. So your motherboard's in the case and we're ready to move on to the next step. So next up I'm going to install the hard drive. In order to do that we've got to take out this drive cage first. So I'm going to unscrew some screws here. It's very exciting stuff. Put them in your handy dandy screw hole. And then reach in here. You need to punch out the fan on the front of the case. And then you can pull the whole drive cage out. So what we're going to do is get these big long screws. They come with the case. We're going to put the drive in, making sure that it stays in the front. You slide it in from the back of the cage. And then, if you look down here, you'll see holes. And we're looking down here to see the holes. They're right here. So if you see these guys right here, then these are shock absorbers, and they'll help keep the whole thing a little quieter. You want to put the screw into them. And make sure it's lined up. It's a little bit tricky to see. That one's lined up. And there's 4 screws for this, so you want to do 2 on each side. So those shock absorbers help keep the machine quieter as the hard drive vibrates. Because hard drives are kind of one of the noisier things in your computer. So what those do is prevent the sound from being transmitted to the rest of the case. So you'll end up with a less clicking and hissing and whirring noises coming through the rest of the computer. It turns out these big metal enclosures act kind of like sound amplifiers. Okay, so that's done. I'm going to take this whole thing, slide it back into the front of the case, making really sure not to get these cables hooked up in anything. You know, the case ships with tape on the sides. You can peel that off if you want. You don't have to if you don't want to. It's not going to hurt anything. So slide that back in. Take this fan. Note the knob goes in the lower right corner. And so we're going to pop that back into place. A little bit of force there, not too much, and then we'll push it back from the inside to get it right again. Grab my thumb screws. Now once the cage is screwed back into place, you can click this front bezel back into place and it'll lock down real good, so it won't pop out like that again. Okay, so next up, optical drive. I've cheated and I went ahead and took the front bezel off. It's really easy to take apart. There's a screw here and a screw in the same place on the other side. Just unscrew them, pop this thing right out the front. To put the optical drive in, you're going to slide it in from the front. And then watch the sides. I'm on the back here, watch, but you should be able to see from the other side. There's 4 screws that'll line up with the holes. And you may have to wiggle a little bit to get it lined up. And then just screw them in and you're done. That's all there is to put an optical drive in the case. So next up, we're going to connect the front panel connectors, which are the things like the power switch, the reset switch, the lights. Traditionally, they've been these fiddly little connectors. If you can see right here, they're these little 2-pin jobs. You have to get down on the motherboard really close, and it's kind of hard to get them done. Luckily, people who make motherboards these days have invented this little block. What this does is you plug the connector onto the block, and then the block fits perfectly on the motherboard. So you really don't have to fiddle around with it too much. So this one, each of these connectors is labeled. This one says power switch. So I'm going to find the one that says power switch on the block, plug it in. It's really straightforward. So there's the power switch. I'm going to do the same thing for the reset switch, which is, let's see, this blue one right here. Oops, still a little fiddly. And then the hard drive light. So the only thing that's tricky about the hard drive light is anything that's a light has polarity. So that means you need to get the positive with the positive and the negative with the negative. In this case, the positive is almost always the color, and the negative is either white or black, depending on the case manufacturer. So see, this is HD LED negative, this is HD LED positive. I'm putting the black on the positive, the red on the positive and the black on the negative. And that's all there is to it. Now, I need to plug it in down in the case. It only goes one way, it's keyed. So I line up the keyed area with the not keyed area. See, there's no pin here, and there's no pin on the connector, and it just slides right into place. Very straightforward. Okay, so now it's time to plug in USB, HD audio, for front panel audio, eSATA, FireWire, any of that kind of stuff if your case has it. If you look, you have all these connectors that come out of the front of your case. This is a SATA cable. Obviously, it's not labeled, but it looks like a SATA cable. We have HD audio for your front panel, headphone jacks, microphone, that kind of stuff. USB. And what we do is we plug them into these ports down here along the bottom edge of the motherboard. They're all labeled. It's really easy to plug them in. I'm going to unsnarl some wires here. USB we're going to plug in here. Again, these are keyed, so they only go in one way. Just make sure you don't plug them in the wrong way. The only thing you have to be careful of here is not to plug in your FireWire ports into your USB ports or vice versa, because you can't actually destroy USB and FireWire equipment that way. eSATA is going to go in down here into the SATA ports. It's very straightforward. And then our HD audio is going to go all the way down here on this far side. It's the same way. It's keyed. It's a little different keying, but that's all there is to it. Okay, so next up we're going to install the power supply. Basically, all you do is slide this in the case, screw it in right now. We don't actually have to do anything beyond that for the time being. We'll plug the power in and all that in just a minute. Let me swing this around here. And the only thing you really have to do is make sure it's lined up. Now, if you have a power supply with a fan on the bottom, you need to kind of make a decision about whether you want the air to flow into the case or suck out the bottom or whatever. Look at your case, look at the way the power supply is set up. The power supply can actually go in either way up. It doesn't. There's no requirement, so you can do however works best for your case. Another good tip is if you have trouble getting a screw started, it's always a good idea to roll it back about a quarter of a turn. That way you won't end up stripping threads if you have it lined up wrong. So that's the power supply. We'll plug everything in just a sec. Okay, so this power supply is actually a modular power supply, which means you only have to use the cables that you need when you're building your machine. So what I've done is I pulled a bunch of different cables. We have SATA cables, some normal 4-pin Molexes for fans, video card cables to power the video card, basically all the stuff that we need in order to power the machine. So what I'm going to do now is plug this stuff in. You only really need to use the ones that you need. And the only rule is these are always color-coded. So see these red ones? Plug the red ones for the video card into the red ports in the bottom for the video card. The rest you can plug in wherever you want or however you need. Okay, so the last piece of hardware we're going to put in is your video card. This guy right here, we're going to put it into the PCI Express slots, which are these blue guys with the little flappy things that lock the cards into place. Now your your card only goes in one way. You see it's keyed. There's a notch here and a little bump there. You slide this guy into the slot, make sure it's lined up good, apply a little bit of pressure, and it just clicks into place. Now all you have to do after that is put the screw in to hold the card into the case. You're good to go. Okay, so now it's time to plug in all of your power cables. We're also going to plug in the SATA cables while we're down here as well, just because that's the last of the stuff that we have to do on the hardware front before it's time to boot the PC the first time and install Windows. Here I have the two power connectors. This guy is the great big ATX power connector. This little one is a supplemental power connector. So this one we're going to plug in right back here. It's a little bit tricky to see, but it's between the memory and the video card edge. I'm going to do the same thing with this supplemental power connector. I'm going to cheat and run over the top here. Usually I'd probably run it around the back or something like that, but it's a little bit hard to show here. And it pops in right down here, right by the CPU. After that, we have video card power connectors, which are these two guys right here. It's a good idea to get these all untangled before you start, just FYI. They go into the end of the video card right here, so we can get two in here. They also are keyed, so they only go in one way. Make sure before you start that they say PCIe. That's really important, because if you plug the wrong thing in here, you can fry your video card. Nobody likes making a $200 mistake. And then the last things we want to plug in are SATA and our power for the fans. So SATA power is going to go down to the optical drive. This only goes one way. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a notch right here. Usually the right angle on the SATA connector goes down, and you just slide it in, it just snaps into place. Same thing. While we're down here, we're going to grab one of our SATA wires, run it up underneath all the other stuff, and do the same thing. It only goes one way as well. Metal side goes up, and it'll just snap into place. See, at the same time, we're going to do the SATA on the hard drive. This is going to be a little harder to see because there's a bunch of stuff in the way. But we're just going to run this guy up under here, snap him into place, and do the same thing with the other data cable. Then the last thing you want to do is plug in some of these old school 4-pin Molex connectors, which you're going to use to connect the fans. You can daisy chain as many of the fans as you want. You're not going to hurt anything. Basically, I like to put one fan in the front, one fan in the back. Probably this big top fan is a good thing to have. It runs nice and slow and quiet, and it'll exhaust a lot of hot air out of your case. So let's connect one of these guys down here and one up in the top. Take the bottom one, plug it in. Sometimes those require a little bit of wiggling to get into place. I'm going to run this guy up around here. Now, after we finish building, we'll tidy up the wires a little bit. Right now, this is a pretty big cable snarl, but you want to make sure everything's working before you take time to clean up the wiring. And it's a pretty big job usually. So if you want to do the wiring, get some zip ties, get some Velcro snaps. You can definitely, in this case, you can run the cables all along behind the back of the motherboard. So once everything's up and working, take it all back apart again if you want. Run all the cables along the channels. You'll have a much tidier looking machine than the admitted snarl that we have right here. So that does it for the hardware. It's time to flip the case up on its side, plug it in, install Windows, and see if she works. So the hardware is put together, and the next step is to install Windows. Drop your disk in, change the boot order in the BIOS if you need to so that it boots off the CD first. Then after Windows is installed, you want to install your drivers, chipset drivers for your motherboard, video card drivers, network drivers, all that kind of stuff. Go to Windows Update, update the latest software for your PC so you get security fixes and that sort of thing. Install some games, take it for a test spin, and have fun. I'm Will Smith. Thanks for watching, and you can find more about building PCs at MaximumPC.com.